What's up, guys? Carter, you're too loud. Who's excited that it's February? February. Who's excited for Valentine's Day? So, because it's February, we're starting a new series called Meant to Be. And what we're going to be talking about in this series is what it means to be meant to be in our relationships. So before we get started, I want to ask you guys a question. I want you to shout some answers out to me. What is your favorite on-screen romance, whether it's TV or a movie? Like, what is your favorite romance between two people? Titanic? Jim and Pam? Ross and Rachel. That's an awful one. Pride and Prejudice? No, not Pride and Prejudice. So we got a lot. But I think most of those couples, when you watch the show or the movie that they're portrayed in, we could say that most of those couples were meant to be. Like, those two people were meant to be together. And a lot of times movies and songs and books, they all tell us that love equals destiny, a bunch of feelings, and magic. Like all this stuff has to happen just right for true love to happen. But in reality, most of those relationships, whether they're portrayed in a book, a movie, a TV show, most of those relationships can't necessarily be used as models for our own relationships. Because they're not real. Like, TV and movies teach us that you have to do some pretty crazy stuff to get a date or to fall in love. Like, most on-screen romances are totally unrealistic. And when I say that, I'm talking about Hallmark movies. That doesn't happen. A lot of TVs and movies, they paint unrealistic expectations of what love and what dating is like in the real world. And a lot of times we start to get confused when we compare those relationships to the relationships that we're surrounded by, whether we're comparing those relationships to those that our friends are in, or we're comparing those relationships to the relationships that our parents have or celebrities in real life as opposed to the movies. Like, we get really confused because a lot of real relationships don't match up to what we see in the movies or read in books or see on TV. And the reason that we're going to be talking about dating for this entire month is there's three main reasons that we're going to be talking about dating. And the first of those is that dating is complicated. Dating is complicated. It's easy to look at someone in a happy and healthy relationship and think, oh, they're meant to be. Like, they're just supposed to be together. And that may be true. That may very well be true. They may be meant for one another, but what is also true is that love and relationships can be really complicated. Love doesn't always just happen like you see in the movies and read in books. Another reason we're going to be talking about dating for a whole month is that dating is hard to talk about. Everybody has their own opinion about dating, but none of our opinions seem to be the same. We've all got our own opinions about dating, and it's hard to know who to talk to and which opinions to trust. And then the last reason we're going to talk about dating is that dating is confusing. Dating is confusing. Most of us in this room probably have some questions about dating. There's probably a lot of us in this room who are confused about dating. Girls, you may be confused about boys. Boys, you may be confused about girls. You'll never figure them out. But we all have questions. We all have questions. And it seems like every movie tells us that love is something that you just fall into. Every movie, every book seems to tell us that love is just something that you fall into. And it tells us that if love is meant to be, then you'll just know. Like, you just know that they're the one. And that's kind of like some of these couples we're going to see in this video right here.
I was sitting with my friend Arthur Kornblum in a restaurant. It was a Hornendalet cafeteria. And this beautiful girl walked in, and I turned to Arthur, and I said, Arthur, you see that girl? I'm going to marry her. And 2 weeks later, we were married. And it's over 50 years later, and we are still married.
We fell in love in high school.
Yeah, we were high school sweethearts.
But then after our junior year, his parents moved away.
But I never forgot her.
You never forgot me.
No, her face was burned on my brain. And it was 34 years later that I was walking down Broadway, and I saw her come out of Toffanetti's.
And we both looked at each other, and it was just as though not a single day had gone by.
She was just as beautiful as she was at 16.
He was just the same. He looked exactly the same.
So I think if we had a choice, if we had complete control of everything that happens in our dating relationships, I think we could all agree, like, those are pretty good relationship goals. Like to see a girl and decide that you're going to marry her, like, before you even talk to her, and you're married in 2 weeks, and then you're still together in 50 years, like, well, that's pretty ridiculous. Like, I think we could all agree that both of those circumstances, like, are really, like, awesome relationship stories, because we all want to find somebody that we're madly in love with. We all want to find somebody that we're madly in love with. We want to find somebody who sticks with us no matter what. And then ultimately, we want to find someone that we can grow old with and start a family. But how? How do we do that? How do we go about finding this perfect person who's made just for us? And believe it or not, I have been in your shoes before. It was a long time ago, but I was your age at one point. I did go to middle school. I did go to high school. But when I was your age, I didn't date a whole lot. Like, I didn't date a lot. I wanted to. I just didn't get a lot of opportunities. But all of my friends, like a lot of my friends, were dating, so of course I wanted to. And I had crushes, just like some of you do probably in this room right now. But I got rejected a lot. But it was with good reason. Isabel, put up those pictures. So that's like Justin's stages of awkwardness. Because I'm real. But, all right, you can put that away. But there was the occasion where I would sucker a girl into being my girlfriend. But when I was your age, when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, anytime I found myself in a relationship, my mind was never in the right place. And obviously when I was your age, when I was in middle school, when I was in high school, obviously I wasn't thinking about marriage. Like, I just wanted to be like everyone else. All of my friends had girlfriends, so I wanted to have girlfriends. And when I look back on my teenage years, I regret a lot, especially when it came to dating. And if there had been an instruction manual for dating back then, it would have been super helpful. But unfortunately, we don't have one of those. We don't have an instruction manual for dating. And honestly, the Bible doesn't really give a lot of specific advice on dating. There's not really anything in the Bible about dating. But that's because dating wasn't really a thing back then. Dating wasn't really a thing back in biblical times. And that's because people got married really young back then. Like, back then, you got married right after puberty. So if we were in biblical times right now, most everybody, sixth graders included, most everybody in this room would already be married. That's the reality. That's the reality of relationships. And some of you got super excited about that, but you didn't get to choose who you married. Your parents arranged the marriage for you. So if the person that your parents chose for you had this nasty foot fungus toe rot stuff going on, you didn't have a choice. That marriage was arranged. So because of that, because of the culture back then, there is not a lot specifically about dating. However, Jesus did give some guidance surrounding relationships. Jesus did give us some guidance when it comes to relationships. So the first place we're going to be in our Bibles tonight is Matthew chapter 22. And we're going to read verses 36 through 40. And it's going to be on the screen if you don't have your Bible. But this is what it says. Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So you're probably thinking right now, I just read that verse, you just listened to that verse. Has absolutely nothing with dating, but nothing to do with dating. But what I want you guys to do is I want you to hang with me, because I think that you'll see that this passage actually has everything to do with dating. You see, Jesus says here that loving God is the most important thing that you can do. He says that's the first and great commandment, is loving God with everything that you have. But then he doesn't stop there. He follows it up by explaining that loving God is connected to loving people. And what I want you to see there is that's all people. That's including those that we choose to date. That's including those that we choose to marry. And before we go further into talking about dating, I think we need to start where Jesus started, and that's with the most important relationship there is. That's our relationship with God. Because if we don't first love God well, we're never going to be able to love people well. If we don't first love God well, we'll never be able to love people well or date them well. So let's look at what else the Bible has to say about relationships. We're going to go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. This is what it says. Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So very early on in the book of Genesis, we see that God himself exists in community. God exists in community. I want you to look at the words that are used here when God is talking. He says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. You guys were with us our first week of the year, of the new year. Remember when Dee was up here, we talked about the Trinity, and we talked about how God exists as three persons. So God is one God, and he exists as three persons. Those three persons are the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So God himself, in the very beginning, existed in community. Our God is a relational God. Our God is a relational God. Now we're going to go forward one chapter to Genesis chapter 2, verse 18. It says, then the Lord God said, it is not good that the man should be alone. I will make him a helper fit for him. So not only does God exist in community, but God made us to exist in community. God made us to exist in community. If you remember back to that previous passage in chapter 1, it says that we were created in God's image. We were created in God's image. That means that we were designed to reflect Him and His character. And so because our God is a relational God and we were created in His image, that means we too are relational people. And we have this deep longing to live in a way that is connected with other people. Because the God that we were designed after exists to live in community. We were made to exist in community as well. Now we're going to jump way forward to the book of John, chapter 15. This is verse 9. It says, "As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love." So God exists in community. God made us to exist in community. But God also made us to exist in community with Him. God made us to exist in community with Him. And that's probably the most ignored part of our design. That's probably the biggest part of our design that we as Christians, that we as a people miss out on. Because what we do is we have this emptiness in our hearts. We have this emptiness inside of us. And what we do is we try to fill this emptiness in our hearts with a relationship with a person rather than a relationship with our Creator. You see, we were designed to crave relationships with other people, but a relationship with Jesus is the first and the best way to satisfy our need for connection. A relationship with Jesus is the best way to satisfy our need for connection. And then as we dwell in that relationship with Jesus, as we live in that relationship with Jesus, our other relationships will follow. And that's why Jesus said to love God before He said to love others. That's why Jesus said to love God before He said love others, because staying close to Jesus makes every relationship better. Staying close to Jesus makes every relationship better. I'm going to give you guys a few statements that I want you guys to think about. When you guys go into your small groups a little later, you're going to talk about these more. But here are three statements that I want you guys to think about and get ready to talk about in your small groups. The first one is this: if you are hoping a guy or girl will satisfy your loneliness, then you will always feel alone. If you are hoping that a guy or a girl will satisfy your loneliness, then you will always feel alone. That second statement is this: if you're not at peace with God without a boyfriend or girlfriend, then you won't be at peace with God if you have one. I'll read that again. If you're not at peace with God without a boyfriend or girlfriend, then you won't be at peace with God if you have one. And that's something that I learned firsthand, and you'll hear more about that as we go through this series. And then finally, the third statement I want you guys to think about is if you want a great dating relationship, then you have first got to be okay without having a dating relationship. If you want a great dating relationship, then you first got to be okay with not having one. And guys, I can stand up here, I can share all of my opinions I want. I can sit here and tell you everything that I think about dating, but I don't think that's going to be helpful, because the best questions lead to the best answers. The best questions lead to the best answers. So instead of trying to stand up here and give you all the answers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some of the best questions that you can ask. Some of the best questions that you can ask. And the first one is this: is this the right time for me to date? Is this the right time for me to date? Are you old enough? And when I say that, I mean either are you old enough by your own or even your parents' standards? Right now, do you believe that you can make wise dating decisions based on your biblical values? And your answers to these may be yes, but I can't decide that. I can't tell you whether you're ready or whether the answer to those questions are yes or not. And none of your small group leaders can do that. These are questions that you're going to have to answer yourself. These are questions that you're going to have to think about and figure out on your own. Second question is this: do I even want to date? You see, we live in a culture that seems to make dating a priority. Like, if you don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, then you're missing something. I want you guys to know that's not true. Guys, if you don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend, it's not the end of the world. Some of you have like 60 more years to live, and if technology keeps going the way it is, some of you might have 100 more years to live. Like, you have plenty of time to worry about a relationship. Just because you don't have a boyfriend or girlfriend right now is not the end of the world. And there's nothing wrong with not wanting to date right now. Just because you're a teenager doesn't mean that you have to want to date. It's completely okay if you don't want to. It's completely okay if you just want to spend time focusing on yourself. If you just want to spend time focusing on your relationships with your friends, or even if you just want to take time to focus on your relationship with God. Like, all of those things are okay. It's okay for you as a teenager to not want to date right now. And then that final question that you can ask is, how will I know when I'm ready? How will I know when I'm ready? And there's not necessarily a right answer to this one. But there's a few things that I want you guys to think about relating to this question. Going back to that last question, if you're okay with not dating, then there's a chance that you might be ready to date. If you're okay with not dating, then there's a chance that you might be ready to date. If you've set clear dating boundaries for yourself, then again, you might be ready to date. If you've already set those clear standards, those clear boundaries, and most importantly, relating to those boundaries, if you are prepared to say no when someone tries to push those boundaries, then you might be ready to date. And then another one, and this one's going to be hard to hear, because I know you're teenagers and you have hormones and you're emotional. If you're not ready to handle a breakup, then you're not ready to date. If someone breaks up with you and it's the end of the world, then you are for sure not ready to date. Because that relationship is not the most important thing in your life. I don't care how long you've been dating that person. I don't care what you think about that person. You are not ready to date if you don't think you could handle a breakup. Guys, I had 2 relationships in college that lasted 2 years each that ended in breakups. And I wasn't ready to date because they wrecked my world. Guys, you need to realize, because if you can't handle a breakup, if a breakup is going to be the end of your world, like if a person breaking up with you is just going to crush all the hopes and dreams you ever had, then your priorities are in the wrong place. Because the most important relationship that you should be focusing on is Jesus Christ. And there's never going to be a breakup there. And then most importantly, if you already have a healthy and growing relationship with Jesus, then you might be ready to date. Like I said before, guys, if your relationship with God doesn't satisfy you, like if your relationship with God doesn't satisfy your loneliness, then a person is never going to. A person is never going to satisfy the loneliness that a relationship with God was meant to do. I can't give you all the answers. Dating can be confusing, but I hope that over these next few weeks we can kind of get some clarity together. I hope that over these next few weeks that we can try to figure some of this out. But tonight, I hope that one thing is clear, and that's that loving others well, whether that's dating or not, starts with loving God well. Loving others well starts with loving God well. And guys, I know I'm sitting up here saying all this stuff like I'm married. It's easy for me to say this stuff. And Dee would tell you the same thing. I love God more than I love Dee. Dee loves God more than she loves me. And if you've got that flipped around, then there's a problem. If you would rather talk to your boyfriend or girlfriend than talk to God, then there's an issue. Because again, that relationship with God is the most important relationship that is ever going to exist in your life. And it's the only one that's going to matter when you leave this earth one day. Because guess what? Your boyfriend or girlfriend, they don't decide whether you go to heaven. They don't determine your eternity. Dating a Christian doesn't get you extra points to go to heaven. You should be dating a Christian if you claim to be a Christian. Don't hear me wrong. But no relationship on this earth has anything to do with your eternity. So as we prepare for these coming weeks, I want to challenge you guys, whether you're in a dating relationship or not right now, I want to challenge you guys to take a few steps closer to God. I want to challenge you guys to take a few steps closer to God because, like we said before, staying close to Jesus makes every relationship better. If you're in a dating relationship and you take steps closer to God, one of two things are going to happen. That relationship's going to get better, or you're going to realize you shouldn't have been in that relationship to begin with. And again, if that scares you, if the thought of that scares you, then you probably shouldn't be in a relationship to begin with. Let's pray. God, I thank you for each and every person in this room. God, I thank you for just their willingness to be here. God, as we go into this series where we're talking about dating and it's awkward, and God, I just thank you that they're still willing to be here, God. No matter how awkward the conversation is going to get, no matter how uncomfortable they may feel, God, they're here. And God, I pray that as we go throughout this series, God, that each and every person in this room, from the youngest to the oldest, God, students to volunteers, God, that as we're going through this series, God, that you would speak to each and every one of our hearts. God, that we would evaluate our relationships. God, that we would evaluate our priorities. God, and that we would make an attempt to take just a few steps closer to you. God, maybe there's somebody in here who has taken no steps closer to you, God. God, I pray that you would work in that person's heart tonight, God, that they would feel your pulling on their hearts, God, and they would recognize their need for a relationship with you. God, I pray that they would begin that tonight, God. God, that they would start their life anew. God, with that number one relationship, that most important relationship that they will ever be in. And that's a relationship with you. So God, again, I pray for each and every person, those in relationships, those who aren't in relationships, God, I pray that they would focus on you. God, and that they would strive to love you more and more each and every day. It's in your name I pray.